Welcome to the Focal Point Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Riggs. Here I take a deep dive into my personal interests of the hidden craftsmanship, philosophies, and passions behind society's talent. If you're intrigued by artistic nuance, please subscribe and follow on my YouTube channel, Spotify, and Buzzsprout. With that being said, let me introduce you to today's guests. Welcome to the podcast. We're live, we're recording. Go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell the audience what you do and how you got started.
Yeah. So my name's Christopher Maes. I'm a writer-director based in Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. And how I got started in filmmaking actually was probably middle school age. I went from being a troublemaker to discovering a camera and realizing you can take all that negative stuff you're doing and turn it into something creative. And it was probably like horror movies were the first thing I kind of gravitated to at that age. And then I eventually went to UCLA Film School. This was at a time when film schools weren't there weren't very many of them. There were like three, I think NYU, UCLA, and USC. So people really, I remember, friends of my parents asking, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm majoring in film. What do? You watch movies all day? What is, and it wasn't clear sort of what's the professional angle on that, how would you apply that? But when I graduated, I focused really on screenwriting at that point, and I worked as a professional screenwriter for about 6 years in Los Angeles. And that was a great eye-opener in just how the studio system works. It was at a time when you could write a speculative screenplay and sell it or get it set up for development and do rewrites and get paid and make a living. And but it was a chance to meet kind of all the people at the studio level, actors, actresses, production companies that were active at that time. This would have been in the mid to late 1980s, early 1990s. And I think coming out of that, I found myself frustrated creatively that I went into film school as a filmmaker. I kind of came out as a writer, and I'd sort of pigeonholed myself creatively as, okay, you're a screenwriter. And that's all I did, and that's all I thought about. And at some point, I got married and had kids, and my wife said, let's move to the East Coast. It's friendlier out there than living in LA with helicopters and bars on your windows. So so I really, in an odd way, I let go of directing completely and just was like, okay, I'm moving to the East Coast. I worked as a production manager for National Geographic and for Discovery. And I kind of forgot about wanting to direct something until COVID happened. And I found myself working out of the home. And we had a basement space that used to be the kids' kind of area. And they had, grown up and gone off to college. And I looked around this room and I'm like, wow, this is like 15 feet by 22 feet. I could make a soundstage of some kind. I could shoot a movie here. And that was kind of the start of me really getting back into thinking like a director. Like, what story would you tell in a contained setting like that? And so the first movie I did 3 years ago.
It would be Saw, basically.
What's that?
In a basement, a single setting, that would be Saw.
Yeah. Somebody, a friend of mine says he calls it two characters stuck in a box, but it's what it does creatively that I find helpful is it forces you to really focus your story. Like, how do you tell a bigger story and focus it on two characters was initially my thought. And so I made Hemisphere in 2023. And that was a sci-fi thriller with two main characters. And then I did most recently AirShift, that's out now as of a week ago. It's available on Amazon Prime. And that was a horror movie set inside a radio station. But that radio station setting, the air studio, was in my basement in that same space. So I guess my sort of creative journey has been realizing I think I've always been a filmmaker. And by that, I mean, I like knowing how to shoot and light and edit and work with actors and sort of combine all of that. And what's satisfying about what I'm doing now is you're using all those things all the time. It isn't just the writing of the script is maybe 10%. And so I'm finding that I'm using many more aspects of what I'm able to do. And that's a little more challenging too, because you hopefully want to get better.
How many years did you work for National Geographic and what was your role there?
So funnily enough, I worked for almost 7 years, 6.5 years for them. And I managed the natural history unit, which is wildlife shows. And my coordinator, my assistant, was Corey Krinsky, who's now my producer. And that's how he and I met, strangely enough, making wildlife documentaries. And we, sent crews all over the world. We did shows on blue whales and lions and gorillas and chimpanzees. And, every time we did one of these, there were experts at the Nat Geo Society who would be the consultants. And you learned, I was surrounded by brilliant people, and me with my, BA degree from film school, I was like, oh my God, this is what, people who really study, who have a calling in life, what that looks like. And, but I think it taught me to work in a really lean manner, because most documentary crews are small, They'll
Right.
send, the only way you're going to get wildlife behavior is you can't have 10 people standing, because the animals are just staring at you like, who the hell are those guys?
Yeah,
So
you got to get in and get out. You're basically like snipers trying to find a
it's
position.
it's like you have a producer, cameraman, and a second camera, and that's kind of it. And you hang out and you hide out and sort of stand still, and after an hour the animals forget about you, and then they go about their behavior. So I think what Nat Geo taught me in an indirect way was just the value of having a small, capable team for your crew.
Mm-hmm. If you said that you had been working on the alien documentaries, we were about to have a very different episode.
Well, so actually, before I did natural history, I did a show called Is It Real with
That
Eleanor
sounds vaguely
Grant,
familiar,
French
actually. I may have
Horowitz.
seen it.
And it's an early sort of series that explored paranormal phenomena from two standpoints. The first standpoint is it is real, and here's how it's happening. And that was all the people that believed in the phenomenon. And the second half of the episode, because these are 1 hour long, was the skeptics saying, no, this is how it was faked, or this is what. So we did like the Shroud of Turin, we did, spontaneous human combustion, we did the Legend of King Arthur. And so that was, when I first started with them, I was sort of thrust into this series, which was completely in my own sort of ballpark as far as my interests. So I did do some, one of them was a ghost ship, the Mary Celeste, that was discovered with food and nobody on board, and no one knows what happened to the passengers, So I did do a little bit of that.
No, that's pretty cool, because that personally, that scratches a different itch of mine, which is not relevant to the show necessarily, but if that could be a whole different podcast, I could probably.
Yeah. Sure. I do find what's helpful about doing those documentary series is usually with those in particular, that type of show you're talking about, they do recreations. So those are little mini films. You hire actors, you put costumes on it. If it's
reenactments,
you're like, we need to get horses, we need to get riders, we need to get whatever that steel mesh thing is. People, yeah, exactly. So you're like, but we only have, those are little budgets. It might be, we have like $15,000 to shoot the recreate for 2 days. And so you're stretching everything to be like, how do we get enough of this so that when we're doing the documentary, we can illustrate some of the ideas. So I found that super, super helpful for indie filmmaking.
From your experience with working with small crews for Nat Geo, what did you find that translates the most to indie productions when it comes to being able to accomplish something on a small budget?
Yeah, I think the first is you really have to be upfront with people and say, it's only going to be this many crew people. Because you don't want crew showing up and a cameraman saying, where's my gaffer and my second camera and my media manager? And you don't want that happening. So I try to be really frank up front when I'm having conversations with crew people. I'll say, look, at least part of the movie is going to be in my basement if there's a set that we built there. And we can probably fit 4 crew people and the actors, and that's about it. So often I look for someone who's not afraid of that. If it's a cameraman, they might say, I light my own stuff and I just need a gaffer. And that's 2 people who do, that's your camera department. And for the sound, if I can have one person that can run that, that's great. And then ideally an additional person be sort of a production coordinator to do a little bit of everything. They do everything from, as I like to put it, I make sure they check with the actors to make sure no one's feeling abused, that our hours are reasonable, that I'm asking them for, reasonable things in their performance, and making sure we have food on time, that we take a break. And, if somebody's stressed out, that coordinator can pull me aside and say, Chris, she needs 10 minutes to, take a break here. Even doing take after take, so that's sort of the minimum. And I think the way to get there is by having a smaller space where we shoot, we can pre-light it, generally speaking. So often the DP and I will come through a couple days before we start shooting and rig the instruments. And you come up with like a lighting plan, which we did in AirShift. We're like, here's the lighting plan inside the Air Studio. She has a desk lamp. She has a lamp behind her near the wall that's going to have a diffusion around it. And then we're going to throw some light from outside the Air Studio through the windows and diffuse that. So by doing all of that kind of homework ahead of time, then when you're shooting, you're not trying to scratch your head and figure that out. So I think it's a combination of just being sort of upfront with people and giving some time, some prep time, because I think with AirShift, again, I didn't really know. I told the audio guy, I want to use her mic. The mic that we have, the prop mic, it's an actual mic.
The condenser mic.
Because when a person's 2 inches away from a mic talking, in that sort of radio, hey, you're listening to airwaves, and it's a very different sound than if you've got the boom mic 4 feet away, So again, those are, just useful to have those conversations up front. I think I gave him half an hour, and Nick, our audio guy, looked at my audio board and knew what it was, and so here's your turntables.
Oh, thank God.
Well, yeah, I didn't know. I thought I sort of understand it, but he was deep in the in the weeds as an audio guy, and that helps the actors too. So for Ashley, our lead actress, then had the ability to run an air. When she put the headphones on, she was really hearing the music. She was really talking in the mic and hearing herself, and it just helps to establish a level of reality, hopefully, for the actors.
How did you come across Ashley? Like, how did you acquire your actors as well as your crew for this project?
Yeah, so the actors I used, Breakdown Express, which is sort of an adjunct, I think, to Actors Access. It's free. You create an account, you post some information about your film, what it's about, who the main characters are, a quick description, when you're going to shoot, if there's pay, how much. And I did that initially, but at the same time I was kind of preparing that, I discovered Ashley through Facebook, through a mutual friend. And I saw this picture of her. I'm like, she has an interesting look. And I looked into her background and saw she was a drummer, and looked at a little bit of her other work, including a movie she did called Hello, It's Me, that's on Amazon Prime, where she plays a supporting character. And I thought, I bet she could, I want to have her read for this, because I had a weird sort of gut feeling that she's she has a bit of a tough exterior, a little bit tomboyish. And it's kind of how I envision this character, somebody who's kind of tough on the outside, but all her vulnerabilities are sort of hidden under the surface. And so I reached out to her through Facebook and said, will you audition for this? And thankfully she said yes. And I had her show up with all the other actors through Actors Access. And she probably auditioned and read with like 5 or 6 different male characters. I was just trying to check the chemistry of everybody, because it's casting a movie. Somebody somewhere said, for a director, casting is 90% of the job. I would amend that and say casting is like 10 or 15% of the job. Once you have the actors and you rehearse with them, that's the rest of it, so that when you show up on the set, there's still work to do, but you certainly want to start with picking the right person through the casting session. So it was really through those auditions where we would pair people up different ways, and I had my producer, Corey Krinsky, helping me to watch those and run those, and you schedule them back to back. So you do half an hour with this team, and I would have them often do a little improv at the end, so that part of that's for me to see are they okay with that? Because as much as I have a script that's written and pretty much set in stone when we're shooting, I'm always welcome to ideas, and we may find that a scene doesn't work properly the way it was written, and we want to explore something different. So I often will have them ad-lib a little too.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, because when you're directing a project, sometimes you're going to have quick ideas on the spot on set that you want to try out. And so like checking the actor to see if, they're good with improv, or at least somewhat competent, is like one of the key things that, you're looking for when you're casting a person.
Absolutely. And there are times, I think there were like 2 scenes that we changed pretty drastically. One, we had in AirShift a scene where right after this murder has happened and the woman realizes, the DJ, that the man she thought was a friend is a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
I think as originally written, I had her scared of him, and he was pacing around her, and I read the scene the night before we were going to shoot, and like, God, something feels really wrong about this scene. This feels like she's a victim. And I thought, what if I flip it and she's mad at him? What would that do? You're a serial killer and you murder someone, and then the woman that you think is going to be like, oh, please don't hurt me, instead she's mad at you, yelling at you. What the hell's wrong with you? You don't do that, I thought, well, I haven't seen that in a movie before. And so I quickly the next morning rewrote the scene. And when the actors came, and I said, I think I sent them a text, but I said, this is a different scene. We're not doing it the way it was written. And because they were both skilled with improv, I don't think it threw them. We rehearsed it once or twice and then just shot it. And it's, you definitely want to have room for that. I think the wrong thing would be, and you check this with actors. You can ask them, how are you with doing long takes? Because if an actor if they're a TV actor who's not accustomed to learning the whole scene or the whole script, that might be a problem. But if it's somebody who comes from a theater background, on the other hand, they may be totally fine, and they'll be like, I'll do the scene all the way through. And I've
also found from personal experiences that when it comes to theater actors trying out film for the first time, is that they're obviously they're very good at memorization, but sometimes improv tends to be their weak spot, because when you're on stage, you don't want to go off script. Like there's a whole production that is relying on perfect continuity every single time. And the other thing with Ashley is that she has a really good radio voice. She really does.
She worked with a DJ. There's somebody that I knew from LA, Trisha Halloran, who worked as a DJ at a station there called KCRW, which is the NPR station in Los Angeles. And I reached out. I had met Trisha years before, and I reached out and said, will you do a 1-hour Zoom call with Ashley and just talk her through what being a DJ is like? And she agreed to do that. And I think that helped a lot, because most DJs are juggling many things at once. There used to be a time in radio where you had your own engineer who did all, you just were the personality, and somebody else played the records and did the audio mixes and cued the commercials. And as, belts got tighter at radio stations, they started cutting positions. And today a DJ is an engineer. They often do promotions and commercials. They record and mix those themselves. They wear a lot of hats. And I think that was helpful for Ashley to meet and talk to Trisha to get some sense of that.
Well, similar to the parallel between Ashley and her character is that both are jack of all trades. Like her talents don't just extend to acting. Like she's a drummer. She also does a few other things, and she's a competent actor. Where it's like a lot of actors that you'll go through casting with them, it's like they're kind of a one-trick pony. And I think that's something else Ashley told me when I interviewed her for the episode like a couple months back, is that one of the best things you can do to stand out as an actor is to have other talents than acting.
I would totally agree with that. I would totally agree. I think as well, I'm still learning this. I feel like I'm getting better with each movie at working with actors. And I think that's the key to probably a successful movie, is credible performances and characters that you create with them. Because we've all seen movies where the plot is engrossing, but if the performances are flat or wooden, you check out. You're not into the movie. Conversely, I've seen movies where there's some amazing performances, and even if there was some plot stuff that's like, often the actor will carry me through stuff. There are movies where the whole experience of the movie is an amazing performance that you walk away remembering. So with that in mind, I'm always trying to sneak little parts of actors into the movie. Like with Ashley, she had some props from home. I said, bring what you have in Ohio, bring it to the set, and we'll stick it around the air studio.
We need you to move in.
A little bit, but the idea, and I think we did this on the previous movie on Hemisphere. I stuck a couple things, little joke things for the actresses. You're on a space station, but I'm going to stick a little cartoon character thing here from the 1980s. But little things to sort of remind you you're playing a person, a human. So don't get too hung up on the plot and all of that. Just try to be in the space of you're an actual person with feelings and emotions. And sometimes that helps if you can have the actor borrow little aspects of their own life and bring those to set or wear them. Or, I think Ashley had a necklace around her neck that was of a drum set. It's like, okay, you're a drummer, so that's what Lisa will wear. That's her,
And she incorporated that into her performance too, like, her fiddling with the drumstick. Those are things. Just little, me personally knowing her, like, I know why she did that.
I think too,
she just does that naturally.
Doing it. What I liked is when she does it, she's so second nature. And I watch, I'm like, I could never do that. It would be flying off and smashing, crashing into the walls. Me trying to twirl the drumstick like that. But I feel like that's, as an indie filmmaker, it's something you can do that doesn't cost anything. And the major film studios don't necessarily have a lock on great acting, even though they're very talented, name actors even I can think of. There's just as much talent in the little smaller pockets of acting communities around the US that if you tap into those, and as a director, if you say, my goal is I want to bring more of that character to what I'm doing, there's a better chance you'll engage with an audience in that way.
I want to backpedal for a second because from the conversations that I've had so far on this podcast, a lot of artists either got back into their craft because of COVID. Describe to me the moment during the lockdown that you're like, I think I want to give this a shot.
So I had written probably 3 or 4 drafts of a space station story that at the time I had a new agent, representation as a writer, and was sending this out. And I was really obsessed with, there's some sort of movie in the idea of a person being set on one mission and then realizing it's really something else going on. And so I sort of had that in my head. And when COVID happened, I was working for a company in DC, and they said, sending everybody home to work from home. And I thought, well, where will I set up my office? And my daughter had just moved out of her bedroom. And I thought I could either do that, or no one's in the basement space of our home. We have a fully built out with a bedroom, a bathroom, and sort of a middle, like a large sort of almost conference room sort of size space. And I literally set my desk up there. And the more that I spent, probably within 2 weeks, I just kept looking around when I was doing client calls and whatnot. I'm like, this is stupid. I'm in this space. No one's using it. And I sort of asked my wife, hey, would you be bothered if I built a film studio, whatever that means? And she's like, no, just don't, make holes in the walls, I think was her, condition. And so I think really, part of it was that, and part was I was very frustrated with Hollywood at the time, had stopped making movies. They said, well, we're in lockdown. No one can make movies. It's not safe anymore on set. There were COVID protocols. I worked on an independent feature film during that time, and we shot, and there were these zones, and everybody had to wear masks. And
what was your role on that one?
As a production manager. So basically managing the budget and hiring all the crew and paying the actors and that sort of thing. Gotcha. But what I saw was how expensive it was for all these COVID protocols. And I sort of looked at that and thought, well, as an indie filmmaker, again, what if I did it with a small crew and we were, we tested people before they came to set, take your COVID test. And so we make the attempt, but we're not like the way a union can sometimes be very rigid, like, about the protocols. I thought, we'll shoot Hemisphere was the movie in this case, so that if we shoot it in a short time frame, 8 to 10 days, there's a good chance we won't have anybody, get COVID or bring it to set and spread it around. So I think it was both those. I think it was being downstairs in that area, but I think the second thing was hearing from the industry, we can't make movies. Everything's on lockdown. And I was like, wait a second. You're telling me we can't entertain audiences? There's no story. There's no way to, if you're used to making big, huge blockbusters, how do you do a story with two characters in a room? You know, that goes back to our two characters stuck in a box. So that was probably a little bit born of, you know, belligerence on my part, which is, what do you mean you can't make a movie? Of course, I'm going to show you. I'm going to make a movie, and I'll show you.
Challenge accepted.
A little bit. And I think, you know, I was a little ignorant of how much effort is involved in making a feature film, but I think that's important. I think it's okay. You don't have to know everything. And sometimes you can do something creative with that, you know, whatever that is in you. If somebody tells you no, you know, I've had people tell me you can't make a movie about serial killers because it's all been done. There's nothing new to be done with serial killers. That was a quote that a studio person gave me. And, you know, with AirShift, we're like, well, yes, except what if you had a zombie outbreak come in? Then what? You know, so I always take, no, you can't do that as a bit of, like you said, a challenge or a call to action.
So Hemisphere was your first feature. Your newest one, AirShift, is your second. What were the lessons that you learned from the production of Hemisphere that you were aware to try to not repeat those mistakes when approaching AirShift?
So I think the biggest thing with Hemisphere, it is a special effects movie and it's sci-fi, it's set in the future. And there was a lot of what we did in set design where I didn't have a huge budget and we dressed the sets to a certain degree. And I think some of the sci-fi enthusiasts in the audience called us out on that. They're like, wait a second, I recognize that's they would point out, that's a packing container you painted gray and stuck to the wall. You know, they would point out certain set design things that I didn't think people were paying attention to, and they were. And so I think with AirShift, the first thing was I need to do something set in the present day, not in the future. And let's not do sci-fi. Let's try to do something, the challenge was I need to make a believable radio station, air studio set. But I thought I'm confident I can do that. One of the things is I have, thanks to my dad, I have some carpentry skills. So I can build flats and walls and windows and doors and put sheetrock up and paint and all those things. So I thought if with AirShift, if I just avoid the sci-fi and future, that's one less headache, that I can get busted on. I do think the value of rehearsals, we rehearsed a lot on Hemisphere, and those were both local actresses, two local actresses on Hemisphere. That the benefit of that was we rehearsed for 5 or 6 days at night on the set before we ever shot a frame of the movie. We blocked out scenes, we discussed the characters, and that was the next movie I do, I want to sort of insist on that. On AirShift, I wanted that, but because I cast Ashley from Ohio, Patrick, the serial killer from New York City, and Margarita's also from Manhattan, suddenly I had 3 out-of-town actors, and it was like we had 2 days, really 2 half days to rehearse. And it wasn't probably as much as I would like to really, to dig into the characters. So we didn't have that on AirShift, whereas I think, I would have, in hindsight, I would have rather, if I had a week, to just work with the actors. I think the benefit of all that is the performances are a little more stable, and you can identify problems in the script if there are problems, transitions, and that sort of thing. But other than that, I think I did not foresee, the one thing I kind of underestimated is the difficulty level in AirShift of there's 3 primary locations, 2 of which are not under my control. There's 2 other places we had to travel to and dress sets and make sure we didn't destroy any somebody else's property. I think I underestimated it's an extra variable to do that. And the other is the actors. We had our 3 main actors, and we had 2 supporting, so that's 5. Then we added a newscaster, Morgan, so that's 6. Then I had a bunch of zombie extras from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, That was another 4 people. So when you add all that together, it was like this huge cast. And I really wasn't prepared for, when you have shoot days with a lot of people, you have a lot of questions, and, it's just a different way of directing.
And people have questions for you, and then you got to answer all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can't tell somebody, we're too busy, I can't answer your question. You have to.
You're like, bugger off,
Yeah. So I think what I learned, I'm glad that they were so different from each other. I think if AirShift had been, a mirror of the Hemisphere experience, I would not have learned as much. I think because it was much more complex of a movie logistically, it forced me to try some different things. I think on AirShift, with one of the shoots we did, I divided up scenes. I said, we're running out of time. And I tore pages out of my storyboard scenes oftentimes, especially the action scenes. I tore pages out. I gave them to Donald Dim, our art director. I said, you take the gaffer and you go shoot all these scenes with zombies breaking in and going down the hallway. And then we're going to peel off the actors and the rest of the crew, and we're going to shoot these underground scenes, these dialogue scenes. So we shot, the 2 things concurrently over the period of like 4 or 5 hours. And that was kind of the way we needed to do it to get everything done we needed to in that particular shoot day. And so it taught me, I think, flexibility, like let go. They'll shoot whatever they shoot. You gave them storyboards, try to follow these, but feel free to improvise too,
I can actually kind of relate to being able to spot, like spot particular construction products when it comes to set decoration, because I was at a film festival earlier this year, and there was coincidentally also a space themed short film that was there, and they built this corridor out of basically air filters. There's like a square home air filters. Okay. Yeah. And so I spotted that immediately, and I'm like, but the way that they did it was actually really good. Like, I know I was probably only one of maybe 2 people that actually knew how they did that. And it was really creative. It took me out of it because I recognized it, because I'm also in construction at the moment. And, but I also appreciated it because I'm like, oh, you did it really well. Somebody had a redneck friend that knew what they were doing on set, and they were able to do it.
I would say that I'm more impressed by sci-fi than almost any other genre. That on the independent side, I've seen people pull off some really creative, clever stuff, where either it's one of the things I learned from Joe Tyler, our DP for Hemisphere, is he said, don't light everything. He said, go for dark, go for shadows. Your main characters, yes, we want to see. Let the light fall off, and that's less stress on you to dress the set. And we had in that movie, I think we had like a crawl space where 2 characters hid out where there were some bad guys down below, hijackers in the space station. And he really was like, he gave me input. I would walk him through the set, and he'd be like, bring the ceiling lower so it's more cramped, keep that wall dark, don't put anything there, put more dark, gray paint over here. And there's a lot you can do with both hiding things from the viewer, and then, as you're discussing too, being clever with using stuff you get at Home Depot that you're like, that's an interesting texture, and if I paint it flat gray, you won't immediately know what it is, but it looks futuristic in some manner,
Yeah, people that aren't filmmakers don't realize how much work that goes into a production is actually really blue-collar work. That's really something that's underestimated, honestly, in my opinion.
I would 100% agree that in fact, I don't have the budget for this, but I would love to someday have a blue-collar crew of guys and be like, here's the plans I drew. I'm going to leave, take your 2x4s, frame this out, to just have them build it. There is a lot of it that is like more construction oriented. And if you have the space for it, you can light from above, and you can be like, more the, one of the things that I gravitate toward with movie making is set work, just because you control it. You control the lighting. Nobody's going to kick you out. And you can often light, if it's a big enough space, you can light from above, or you can come up with a way so that you're making an environment for the actors. But you can also, when you cut and break, you go somewhere else and you eat and talk and whatever, but you have your sort of built area, which is, can be cool. And it's just you have control over the elements, so you don't get rained out or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, conversely, what were the lessons that you learned from AirShift that you're going to be mindful that you think you are going to pay attention to going into, potentially your next one?
Yes. I think, as I mentioned, a lot of characters. There are a lot of sort of pieces of AirShift. It isn't like a simple story. It's just like two variables. It's like female disc jockey serial killer, then zombies, and then there's a singer-songwriter who comes into the mix. So I think for the next project I do, I probably want to get to a point of simplifying the plot, so that I focus more on the characters, not so much on guns and knives and blood and zombies and other stuff that can be, that's certainly can be entertaining for an audience. But I want to try to challenge myself as a writer a little bit more to try to make something watchable where there's a little more drama going on. And then I think the other thing is I would like to try shooting something with a little more of floating camera. And by that, I mean, if I work with the DP who's like, we're going to move and the actors are going to go here, move over there. And then they do some of the scene and then move back over here. Sorry, I'm moving in your frame here. But the idea is I would love to do a movie that feels a little less edity, if that makes sense, and a little more like this flow. Like you start a scene wide and then you move in and now it's a 2-shot or a close-up. And then we're going to go back, we go over here. I haven't tended to do that. It requires a little more choreography. But again, if I'm focused on performance and depending on what the story is, that would be a great thing to attempt. I think the last lesson is doing exterior night shoots is is probably one of the most difficult things you can do, maybe over shooting on water. We had one exterior night shoot with AirShift, and because you're dependent on when is the sun set, when is it truly dark, and then you have to light everything so you can see what's happening, and then you have to work, in this case it was with zombies and one of the lead characters outside the radio station. That was all one compressed night shoot, and I think we had to get all the zombie footage inside 5 hours before I told them we'd be out of there by like 1 a.m. And so literally the sun went down, it was totally dark at 8 p.m. So it was like a 5-hour window to cram all this footage in. And I think next time going into a project, I would really look at, if I have a night shoot, I would schedule it differently and understand that, trying to get 8 pages of material is not realistic,
No, that's quite the task.
Yeah. It's, and it wasn't dialogue. Sometimes there's the benefit of dialogue is sometimes once you get set, characters have a discussion, it's 2 pages of script, and boom, you're out. And so it can be a quick way to get through the page count. In this case, these are all action scenes. Guy walks out, stabs a zombie, another one grabs him, he stabs it and runs back inside. It was like a series of, all action stuff that took, 10 or 15 seconds of screen time, but you have to light it, has to be in focus. You got to cover it a couple different shots. And, so it was a good lesson to me. And don't overschedule your crew or talent.
What were your discussions when it came to approaching the night shoot with your DP?
Yeah, so Joe Tyler and I had actually looked at that space first, like 2 months before we shot, 2 or 3 months. Like it was the summer, I think, and we shot in December. We walked over to the space and looked at it during the day. And at that point, we thought we were going to use the interiors as well. We took pictures of the outside, and I had heard from other filmmakers, you can shoot day for night now. That's a thing. Did you see Jordan Peele, Nope? And I said, no. And they said, go watch it. So I watched Nope. I'm like, well, that's really interesting. They shot day for night on all those night scenes. So I go to Joe and I say, let's try day for night. He says, it's not going to work. I say, what do you mean? I'm hearing everybody's buzzing about it. He said, let's do a test shoot and I'll show you. And so we went and shot like 3 or 4 shots at the location at like 2 p.m. And then we gave them to our color correction guy, Joey Deanna, and he fiddled with them and he said, this is the best I can do. And it clearly looked like overhead sun. There was no way to cut the contrast. It didn't look, it was like super blue filters and it just looked fake. And I was like, okay,
Yeah,
We're
the only
not.
way really to do day for night is if you have overcast weather. If you have
Yes,
sunshine, those hard shadows just completely
exactly. If we were in a
blow the
forest
illusion away.
canopy or something, we would have had a shot at it. But so that was the first step, was that telling me, realizing, okay, we can't do day for night. And he said, so we're going to shoot night. And he said, I need more people on my camera crew. So I think we got him 2 people in addition to himself. And then the place that we picked, strangely enough, it used to be a functional TV station. Now has studios, sound studios you can rent out for musicians.
Mm-hmm.
It had no lighting in the parking lot for reasons unknown. Big parking lot. You would think TV station, liability, you're going to have lights.
Right, yeah. Security.
Your employees. No lighting. So the only lighting is in front of the station. So Joe's like, okay, I'm only going to be able to shoot the first 40 feet of the parking lot, and then we're done. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay. So he said, I'm going to need China balls. I'm going to need 2 of them. We're going to need to run power, and I'm going to need time to move them. It isn't like you can just jump to a new setup, So he said, if we can structure it so we shoot all the angles from one direction first. And so I went through the script and took every scene, every shot that I wanted, with the main character and zombies. And I'm like, first we're shooting everything pointed this way toward the radio station with the lights. And we shot scene 64A take 1 and scene 36B, and it was like almost like a mosaic. But I had the script and I'm like, I mapped this out. I spent like 3 or 4 times going through it to make sure I wasn't screwing it up. It's basically this shot list where I knew I need a wide shot of zombies doing this, and I need a tight of that. And we got all that from that direction. And then we had lunch break, and then we shifted the shot the other direction. And so the benefit is, and we had like 2 or 3 Zoom calls with Joe, with our makeup effects person, Kayla, who had to make up all these zombies too, and our gaffer and production coordinator. The benefit of those, I think there was 2 or 3 Zoom calls before we overshot, was each time we had new problems to solve. It was like, the first one was, yes, we can shoot at the station. They'll let us shoot till 1 a.m. Great. We can have total control over the parking lot. Great. The next one is, sunset is at this time. We only have 5 hours a day of night,
Mm-hmm.
So each of the 3 Zoom calls, we tackled the different problem. And I think I would tell other filmmakers, do that. Have as much prep like that as you can, because the night shoot, when it happens, it's like, you don't even know, it's like you're stuck in a tornado. As a director, you're like, okay, we got these miraculously. That's great. Is it in focus? Good. Next shot, and you end up moving at such a quick pace, you can't really, you don't really have time to deal with a lot of logistical, problems. So thankfully we worked out, where's our power coming from? How many lights will we have? And then, like I said, shooting from all one direction and flipping and shooting all the other direction. And there was one thing we improvised. I think I had a scene where I had like 5 camera shots and we were running out of time. And Joe Tyler said, what if I just stick the camera inside his truck? And he runs up the steps and runs to the truck. He runs through the zombies and slams.
Oh, yeah. I remember
and
that part.
That was improvised. That was not intended that way. And that was because we're running out of time. And I'm like, I love it. And then we'll just get a tighter shot of him in the cab with the keys. But we had what we needed. And so you have to be, I think, willing to do that. So again, going into night shoots again, if I do one again, and I'm sure I will, I'll just have to go with, have your storyboards, but be willing to, if you have to go totally guerrilla, seat of the pants, what's your plan for that? Mm-hmm. So that it's not a big deal to shift gears.
So zombies, serial killers, and music. What made you clash all these things together?
So I didn't really have the zombie aspect initially. For many years, I did a short film many years ago called Dead Air. That was just about a female disc jockey and a serial killer who hears her on the air and comes to the station and has some weird mistaken belief that she's his soulmate. And I had that short film in my head for years. I was like, how can I make a feature film version of this? And I think AirShift was my answer to that, which is, I had written 2 or 3 drafts that was just a straight thriller with a woman, a DJ, and a serial killer. And it was very flat. When I got done, I was like, it felt like any sort of Lifetime movie that you would see, woman in jeopardy, male oppressor, woman vanquishes male depressor at the end, and I'm like, that's there's nothing new for an audience with that. And at some point I was literally writing some draft of the script, and the serial killer, the John Bowen character, had killed a character, and then that character came back in this draft. And and a line of dialogue came out of his mouth, which is, I know that guy was dead when I drugged his body outside. What's going on? And I wrote that line, and I stopped like, whoa, what does that mean? And I sort of, it came like before I was really thinking about it. I sort of wrote the line, but it really kind of bumped me. And I thought about it, and I reached out to Corey, my producer, and I said, is this crazy? What if the undead are coming back to the station in some way? And he said, no, not at all. And we batted around 3 or 4 ideas and kind of arrived at, what if the station was on top of some nuclear site from the 1970s that everybody kind of forgot about, and somehow that, Pandora's box got released, and that's, sort of how the zombie part of the story took hold. And I think what appealed to me about it, although it is a bit of a mashup, is the humor potential. I thought the second you think it's a serial killer holding a woman hostage, and suddenly she knows more than he does. She knows the station. She knows where all the exits are. There's zombies outside, and he's the one going, WTF, what's going, I came here, this is my agenda, and now I'm having to deal with this other thing. So I thought that was funny, and it wasn't something I'd seen in a movie before. And I thought, if we can pull this off, it could be quite humorous to see this guy suddenly having to grapple with something he wasn't part of his agenda for the evening.
What was your most memorable moment on set?
So one of the most memorable was probably, there's a scene with a cassette. Jammed up, and the character sticks a pencil in, and this will date me, but I'm a child of the 70s. So I grew up in the 1970s. I worked at an FM radio station in high school and in college after that. And so I remember when we had cassettes and we had vinyl, and that was it. And you had something called an 8-track tape that had terrible audio quality. But I remember we always did that with cassettes. And I think I was talking to Ashley, and she's like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, you stick the pencil through, and you straighten out where it got all crinkled, and you're reloading it. And she had no clue what that was, and she didn't know how to stick the pencil. I mean, no, stick it in this way. And I thought,
you had to have felt ancient when you were teaching her this.
Total generational difference. I'm like, if you took anybody age 55 and older, they know this because we all did it. We all bought some tape that got jammed at some point. We're like, damn, I paid $8 for this with that cassette. And you would figure out how to reload it and straighten out the tape so you could keep using it. So that's one thing that stood out to me that was funny. Just that it was, for me, I had no clue, but that for a younger person, that's not part of their experience. I think the other thing was probably, I think that these younger actors are really driven and determined and motivated to do good work. And I continue to be really, really impressed working with Ashley, with Patrick, Margarita, Donald Dim, Alex, Morgan. So I never had anyone say, I can't do this, or you're asking too much, Chris. They were always eager for more, and I can't say enough good about that. I had no prima donnas and no I've rewritten your dialogue, Chris. I demand that we say it this way. Nothing like that. It was a surprise, I guess, because there were more actors on this than on Hemisphere. I was surprised by the level of integrity, even down to the zombie extras. These are theater students at UMBC in Baltimore. They took it seriously, and they're like, what kind of zombie am I? How do I move? How neurologically, what's going on with me? And they wanted to know. It wasn't like I'm just a textbook zombie. They wanted to know, how do I move, and what part of my body can move? And I appreciate that, and it was a surprise.
What's when it comes to extras? Oftentimes the extras have more questions about their no-name character than the actual actors.
I didn't find that here. I would say the one thing that struck me, and it turned out to be fine, but I had these extras and I had like 4 of them in a scene, and we do the first scene where it's like 3 of them showing up to go and talk about what they're going to do and go below the ground and deal with the uranium deposits that have been stored there for decades. And we go to shoot the scene. And I'm like, okay, we've got the blocking, the camera. Okay, let's do a run through. Mm-hmm. And all 3 of the actors pull out their iPhones and pull up the script and start reading lines. And I'm like, oh no, they don't know their lines. Oh my God, we're dead. No. And I thought, I didn't say, hey, know your lines when you come to set. I assume that was known.
Well, that is a given,
But what I would say to their defense, because I don't want them embarrassed by this, we did 1 take with the phones, and then after that, they got it. And they were just as competent as the more experienced actors. There was never an issue where they missed their line or forgot it. They knew it. They took direction just as well.
They just needed a refresher. That's all.
I think so. And I think it was funny. We did all the zombies first, and then we made them human. So I kept telling them, like, we shot all the footage where the characters had transformed into zombies. We shot all that first. And then about a month later, we shot exteriors where, hey, here's where you show up and you're a human being before you get infected. And they didn't expect that. I'm like, no, I wrote scenes for you. It's, you actually have dialogue, and this could be a good moment for you. You get 2 minutes of presence in the movie on screen, on camera. And I believe they appreciated that it wasn't like they were just playing a monster. They got to be a human. I said, this is a great character arc for you guys. You start as a human, you get infected, you turn into a zombie, you attack other, what a great, how many actors get that broad of a character arc? So maybe it was me selling them a little bit on it, but I did find that there is fun working with college students, and maybe it gives them some stories to take back to university.
Well, I had when I was helping a friend out making his short film, and I was ADing for him, and he told me to have the extras, because the context of this scene was that it was like a cage fight, there's a crowd going and everything. Yeah. And then I had to keep, there was a lot of work goes into actually keeping the extras lively, especially when you're doing take after take after take.
Right.
Because they're doing the same thing over and over repetitively. It's usually something very simple, and then you gotta make sure that they're still, going 100 each take, and then totally. What happens is that the performance
it'll
just starts
off.
to trail off a little bit as they get tired, and especially if you're doing a night shoot, and you're doing zombies where they're having a particular walk.
There are breaks in the action. You're 100% right. We had stuff where it was like, I need these 2. I need Enzo and the other actor. And we would do something, and the other ones are just hanging out at the craft services. And then I'd say, okay, I need all 5 of you.
And they're like, oh,
it's later. And I need you, and I think I used a bullhorn even, because they were far enough away, and I kind of wanted to get more of a, yes, this is a real movie, But there are times where you have to talk them into the moment, You
got to be a hype man sometimes.
I think so. I don't have a problem doing that, but I did notice that otherwise they'd come, and the 2 that had just been in a scene were turned on, and the others that had been, hanging out backstage, so to speak, would be very low energy, and you'd have to be like, remind them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cheerleader.
How many days? What was the production schedule? Like, how did you decide to structure it in a way that you could go about shooting the film in the most efficient way possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a really important question as an indie filmmaker early on. Once you have the script written, I try to figure that out pretty soon. In the case of AirShift, it was, I want to shoot all the Air Studio stuff, all the interiors first. And we shot for 5 days in the Air Studio. We shot the performance of the singer-songwriter and her manager. We shot all the stuff with Lisa and John, him showing up, being friendly, turning into serial killer. We shot all the stuff strategizing. There's zombies. What are we going to do? We did all of that in 5 days, December, a year ago. And my thought was, if we can get that shot first, I'll cut it together and I'll get more confidence, and then I'll know what we need for the exteriors, the stuff with zombies. I mean, it was one of those things where I literally kind of made a almost like a progress list.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like about 60% of the movie was the radio station interiors. And I thought, well, if I can get that shot and in the can, that last 40% won't be, I'll be over the hump, so to speak. It didn't quite work out that way. I think that last 40%
rarely does.
was the hardest thing I've done in my life. It just was, again, because of the amount of logistics with people and places and that sort of thing. But that was my approach. I had at one point, I had it the opposite. And I thought, what if we do all the exteriors first with zombies and all of that? And then I go back to doing the stuff that I have more control over with the actors. And for whatever reason, I think the DP and I talked and he said, go with your first instinct. Let's do all the air studio stuff. Part of that is that it's easier. And so what you want to do as a filmmaker is give yourself the easiest stuff first. So there's room to work stuff out with the actors, to make adjustments with your crew. If you're not at your best as a director, there's fewer demands on you, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and so by having that first shoot be all the interiors, I knew that we wouldn't get rained out. We didn't have any problem with daylight or nighttime. It was a controlled space that we worked in. And I think it helps you develop a vocabulary with your actors so they trust you. Because the first time you're shooting, they're like, I don't want you to make me look like an idiot on screen, and you have to sort of earn their trust and be like, I think that was good. I would change this and I would change that. And when she's pushing you, don't be afraid to push back. You give them whatever your direction is, and you're trying to win them over a little bit too, and so that later when we got to those night scenes, I don't have a lot of time to have conversations with Patrick about his character's motivation. I'm like, you run up, the zombie comes at you, you stab him. It was more of a mechanical thing, but because I had shot with him earlier inside more of the character developed type stuff, I think he trusted me with those later scenes a bit more.
Yeah, if you trust that your actor understands the character well enough that you don't need to constantly be giving points on his performance or his take or understanding of the character, the more you can focus on spending your time blocking the scene out. Because that, I think a lot of times in indie filmmaking, especially those who are new to it, they underestimate how much time it takes to actually, block the scene out and get the choreography right, so that it doesn't, not just for the sake of, the camera guy being able to understand, where he's going to spend his time trying to set up for, but also just the efficiency and the aesthetic of the scene.
I think so. When I did Hemisphere, the first movie, I thought, okay, I'm going to be drawing all kinds of storyboards, and I don't have a problem sketching. I'm reasonably quick as a sort of sketch artist, but I thought, God, that's a lot of scenes. And when I realized the first time we were doing blocking with the actresses, just rehearsing, and it was the space, it was dressed as the space station, no crew. Again, this is part of the sort of 1 week rehearsal. I just pulled out my iPhone and I started taking pictures. Like there's a two shot and there's a close up of her and there's a detail I want to get there. And I pulled those out of my iPhone and pasted them in a Word document and sent them to the DP. And I was grateful to have that solution present itself, because I thought, God, it could have taken an hour or two on a shooting day to figure that out, where's the best place for them to. And when there's not a crew around, you get a little bit more organic, I think, with the actors. You can try stuff. What if you're static and I'm moving, or I'm here and while we're having an argument, you're pouring coffee and putting, I always think people seldom sit statically and have an argument or a discussion. Generally, there's always something else. You're cleaning something, or you're making dinner, or you're doing some other activity. That's just sort of how humans are. We try to multitask. And so I'm always looking and blocking for ways of how do we open it up and make it a little more kinetic so it feels like they're doing something while they're having this scene take place.
Yeah, I think newer filmmakers definitely forget that when dialogue is happening, life is also happening. People are just living their lives, and you end up with these really stale and static moments that because especially when you're writing a script, the action isn't always that specific because it needs to be left open to interpretation for the director to be able to actually, exploit for that particular scene in the location that, sometimes ends up changing. You got to be a little bit more flexible with your interpretation.
Yeah.
That's something I think newer directors, when it comes to accomplishing that scene, have to keep that in mind.
I mean, I think what you're saying is in a sense, I look at it this way. I came in when I was in film school, if we rewound to Chris Maes as a 22-year-old, I was having actors follow my storyboards because I would storyboard stuff out and it was like, this is the scene. So you walk 2 lines, say your line, and then walk out of the shot. And now the next shot is a 2 shot, and you walk in and you say, it was all broken up and disjointed. And that's what I thought directing was. And I would direct actors that way. And sometimes they would ask me, like, why is my character in the scene? What do they want? And it'd be like, don't bother me with that. All you have to do is walk. It's a very mechanical approach to directing. And I thought that's what directing was. And the first short that I made, Dead Air, the actors were like, what? Hold on, let's stop all this. Why am I here? What is my purpose? What am I trying to get? And the second I started looking at it from that standpoint, I'm like, wow, that's a totally different approach. Let me work. And if you sort of, as a creative person, shift to the actor's point of view, there are a million ways you could shoot the scene. You could stick the camera on the ceiling and maybe it's an overhead shot. There's a lot of effective ways to cover it technically, but probably the most important thing is, what is the life of the scene and how do you make it feel like it's really happening? So if you can take what you've written on the page and create some kind of reality for it. So it's sort of like the audience is a fly on the wall, or wherever you stick the camera. I've seen perfectly acceptable movies where the camera is like, somebody puts a drinking glass here and you're shooting through that and characters are having an argument about their marriage in the background. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And sometimes those inspired things can be, very effective. And the most important thing probably is that the reality of what the actors are doing is working and feels believable to you. It seems to me, the more I do this, that's the thing that you can perceive right away. When you're watching a movie, if the actors aren't comfortable, you can tell.
Between writing and directing, which do you personally identify with more?
That's an excellent question. I think probably identify more as a director. I try to be nice to myself as a writer. It's a weird sort of Jekyll and Hyde thing. I think the writer part of me is much more sensitive and my feelings can get hurt and all that. And the director side of me is more brash, like, it's fine, don't worry about it, let it roll off your back. But I think you need both to be a writer-director. I think the point that you're writing, you have to be emotionally, be as connected as you can be to the characters and what's going on in the story. Don't worry about visually. If an idea occurs to me, I might say, I envision this scene with no audio at all. Or, if something occurs to you, you can certainly put that in the script. But I'd say the writing side of me is smaller because I view writing more now today as a step in the production of a motion picture. And so rather than the script is all, it's more like when I'm going to put the hat on and be a screenwriter and just write the script, I'm writing it with the idea that now I'm going to give it to my art director. I'm going to eventually give it to actors. I'm going to give it to me as a director. And I'm going to start playing with stuff, and stuff's going to move around. I'm fine with that because I guess I'm both writer and director. It's easier to negotiate with yourself about, I think at one point in AirShift, we had a whole scene with them boarding up the station against zombies. And again, we were running short on time. And then that became, what if we just do a slow-mo shot of Ashley walking down the hall? We do the hero shot that we've all seen in documentary series. And they're walking in slow-mo. She nods to that door and one character peels off. She nods to the other door and that character peels off. That all came from just, the director and me being like, I don't have time for all this other stuff. let's just do one shot with two inserts and we're done with it, So I think, generally speaking, I'm probably identifying more as a director because I prefer, there's something more fun, I guess, about using all those tools in the toolbox.
I would probably gamble then that your sense of creativity thrives more in a collaborative environment than it does solitude. Am I right?
I think so. And again, that was a shift. When I worked as a professional screenwriter, I kind of didn't understand that. I was like, you write the script and make it as perfect as you can, and every dialogue, you really go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And now my feeling is, I'll write something, and I know if I'm working with Donald M as art director, he's going to come up with a bunch of cool ideas, and I'll probably incorporate those into the script. I'll do a revision, and maybe I'll change a set, or I'll change the importance of something. Either I'll change a set, or maybe the set appears 5 times in the story because it's a more integral part of the story. The collaboration is really you giving away ideas and trusting people to run with them. It's impossible to make a feature film where you hold on to everything yourself. So I'm
right.
I love the point where the actors, where we have a table read, and I'm like, these guys get it. This is, there's a certain level of the movie's going to happen now that I feel like if I have a DP and I have the movie cast, the movie's going to happen. I may have a migraine headache on the day we're shooting. I may be, if I have the stomach flu, whatever's going on with me, we can shoot something that's going to look like a scene in a movie, because there are others that are carrying the weights, and you really need that. It's you have, as a writer, you don't ever deal with that sort of side of things. You have really the whole world.
It's all resting on your shoulders.
Yeah, and it's all in your mind, and in your mind, anything can happen. It can be a beautiful. I think I wrote AirShift. I wanted a rural radio station at the top of some gravel road, a parking lot, a quarter mile from all civilization, and you could look down on the city. And we scouted and found nothing like that. I'm like, okay, that's going, that goes away. It's a little more, somewhat more urban radio station. It's still the middle of the night, so people aren't really awake. But there are compromises, I guess, you make as a director that way.
How has directing your material changed the way you write it?
I think it makes, so my scripts are much more lean now. I don't put a lot of what I call hype in something. So when I was a screenwriter, I would write something and try to make it entertaining for a studio executive reading it. If I was writing an action scene, I would put a lot of time into making it entertaining on the page. Joe runs down the hall, and holy smokes, Holly's already there, and the monsters are behind her, and oh no, you write it so that it reads well. When you're writing for yourself as director, it's like, just give me the bare interior room. Patrick walks in livid. I try to use as few words as possible now, because I know the actors will add their things and the crew people will add their things to it. And even me as director, I'll come up with some idea of how I want to do that scene. So I think I tend to get much more lean with my description. And then with the dialogue, I really try, again, there's never a point where you know it all as a writer. So every script, I think I'm getting a little better, or trying to anyway. And I think what I really admire is when you can get to what is the real point of a scene. People are arguing and somebody says, you're afraid of X. And you're like, damn, that's right. That's good. I want that to hang there for a second. And that's kind of the truth of human beings, is we have things that are in the back of our head, and we go through life and we have these challenges. And every once in a while, we're like, oh my God, the whole reason this is happening, I'm afraid of being abandoned, let's say. So in all my relationships, I'm always seeking to be, for the person to assert to me that they're committed to me because I have an abandonment fear, let's say. I'm just picking that theoretically.
Right.
What writing gives you the opportunity to do is explore that. Like, if you know that about yourself, I'm a big proponent of stick as much of your own life, sneak it in somehow. If you're antisocial, put that in there somewhere with a character. If I grew up with a bunch of sisters, so I always feel comfortable writing female characters, and I tend to write them like my sisters, a little more tomboyish, maybe more vulgar than.
I don't even think writers have to try. It's just something that happens unconsciously, and then you have to
Yeah,
you have to be careful to throttle it because sometimes it'll end up just being so personal that it ends up becoming unrelatable to a wide audience.
yeah, yeah. What I like to do. That's a good point. I think there's definitely like I don't view it as therapy. I don't view it as a purge because I do feel like that's for me and my therapist if I go talk about what's going on that way. Um, but I guess what I mean is when I'm starting a movie and when I'm outlining it, I'm like, what do I have in common with this character? Why am I telling this story? What can I bring to it? I don't want it to just be, it's a cool plot. It sounds cool. I want it to
Right.
be like, what have I experienced that I can bring to this that no other writer would? Like if I'm like, oh, I worked in a radio station in the 1970s. Okay. Um, I'm trying to think of whatever thing that um, I think with Hemisphere, I had a family member, a daughter who was very emotionally challenging to deal with, a very belligerent person, very in my face as a quote authority figure as her father. And I thought, let me bring that to Hemisphere. I want one of the characters to behave like my daughter Olivia. And so the reason I'm doing that is I'm like, this is some sort of truth I've experienced that I want to bring to the audience, and I don't think I see other movies necessarily doing it that way. So anytime you can do that as a director and infuse that into your writing as a writer, I think you're ahead of the game because it's like you're pulling a secret out of your life that nobody else knows. It's like, hey, did you know when people get really drunk and the next day when they're hungover, they do X?
Hmm.
I'm not from my personal experience, but if that was your experience with family members,
You're like,
you
I
could
promise
probably
I
write
don't drink.
you could probably write a great scene that way, though, that would go much further than the next person because you'd be like, no, I've experienced this. When you have a hungover parent and they're chewing you out the next day, it goes on and on and on. It
Hmm.
snowballs or whatever the drama is. My sense is that you can tap into it more fully because it's your experience than somebody else that might be like, oh, I saw this in another movie. Let me do an argument scene between a hungover parent and a kid.
Yeah, a lot of the advice that writers end up getting is write what you know, and that is, that's true to a large extent. But writers also write about what they think, what they feel
Yeah,
about certain things that
yeah.
have nothing to do with them. It's writing is also it's also commentary on your own perceptions about things in society,
About the world,
what
the
you
way
think
the world
about, yeah.
works. Yeah,
And you know that advice only goes so far. It helps when it
yeah,
comes to making something feel real, because you're able to put a spin on something that is very personal. But I think a lot of advice about writing about what you think kind of goes under the radar to the detriment of some writers, in my opinion.
yeah. I think like Hemisphere has a lot of ideas in it, which is like the companies oppressing you or not telling you the whole story about why you were sent on a mission. Um, and those are personal feelings I have or ideas. How do I think the future will be? What do I think in the future? I think there will be space stations with hardwood floors and Martha Stewart will design it, not some NASA engineer. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I could be totally wrong, but I thought, well, what if? What if we jump ahead 30, 40 years in the future and there's a space station that has hardwood floors and painted walls and it looks like a living space where a person will, inhabit it for 6 months. That's kind of the idea. And then I think the write what you know part comes in more right emotionally what you know. I don't think
Hmm.
you have to write
That's
a
true.
character like, yeah, I think you can say, I'm going to write a garbage man or I'm going to write a salvage worker or something that maybe you never experienced that in your life. But then maybe they have some little issue that you kind of have experience with, you know. I think those are the things where you can excel as a writer when you put some of your experience is more the emotional side is what you know. I know emotionally what it is to be abandoned or, for me, a big thing is underestimated. I've been underestimated many times in my life. And then I exceeded it and I had bosses and people be like, oh my God, I'm impressed. I never thought you had that in you. And I'm like, why did you never think that? Did you not see all these other things I did for you? But that it takes some people some huge grand gesture before the light clicks on. So, that's my personal issue, but that's probably something emotionally I wouldn't, I wouldn't be opposed to putting that in a story if it was appropriate, because I have some experience with that,
Yeah. Chris, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. Do you have any final thoughts you want to leave with the audience?
No, just I would say if for any indie filmmakers out there, if you're considering doing it, try to take steps and take the plunge and do it. Make a first movie, because you'll learn so much from the experience of doing that, and you'll get help from areas you probably never suspected. That there are others in your community that want to help. That would be my final word.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Anthony. I appreciate it.